Welcome, everyone. Thanks for joining today. I'm super excited for today's call, mostly because we have a very special guest joining us for the latter half of the call today. I am going to get started with our call today in the interest of time. And today we are launching the new name for this career-focused webinar, which is Building Your Alt Protein Career. And today we'll be focusing on food science and entrepreneurship, since our special guest is Minami Ogawa, and I will introduce her a little bit later on in this call. And just to introduce myself, my name is Asia Sheehab, and I'm an academic community specialist at the Good Food Institute. At GFI, I primarily focus on supporting students around the world through our university chapter program called the Alt Protein Project. And I'm happy to share a little bit more about that later on in this call if we have any students in the call today. And just for some background, in terms of this call, we host this call every 3 months. And the purpose of this call is to share career resources and provide an opportunity to gain deeper insight into careers from alt protein professionals themselves based on their personal experiences navigating the field and industry. And who is this call for? This call is truly for anyone, whether you are a technical person or you're looking for non-technical roles, if you're a student in university, if you're looking for entry-level positions, or if you're a professional with years and years or decades of experience and you're looking to transition into the industry, this call is a great starting place for everyone. And I'll try to keep all of these groups in mind as we're going through the call today. So just to give you a little bit of background on what we'll be going over today, I'm going to start off with about a 20-minute presentation where I'll be sharing some background on the Good Food Institute and alternative proteins, as many of you may be newer to the field. And then also I'll share a little bit about GFI's work in the alternative protein space. Then I'll give you an overview of the different career fields and relevant backgrounds for alternative proteins, as well as share a few helpful resources for building your career in this space. And then we'll move into the fun portion of this call, which is the fireside chat and Q&A with our special guest, Minami Ogawa, who has a fascinating educational background and a lot of insights to share, given her experience as both a food scientist and co-founder of Optimized Foods, which is an alt protein startup harnessing the power of mycelium to make better, more sustainable foods, such as cultivated caviar. With that said, I'm very excited to dive more into conversation with Minami later and open up the floor for questions from you all. Please feel free to submit those questions in the designated Q&A chat, and we'll do our best to answer all of them at the end of this call. Alrighty, we're gonna dive in now. So the Good Food Institute is an international nonprofit working to build a sustainable, healthy, and just global food system. I work on the GFI US team, but we also have affiliate teams in Brazil, India, Europe, Asia Pacific, and Israel. We are funded by philanthropy and have earned GuideStar's Platinum Seal of Transparency, an honor that's obtained by less than 1% of nonprofits. So that's something we're really proud of. In order to accelerate the transition toward alternative proteins, GFI focuses our work in 3 main pillars. Our science and technology team, which is where I work, we work to advance foundational open source research in alternative proteins and thus create a thriving research and training ecosystem. Our corporate engagement team focuses on building relationships with the world's largest food manufacturers, meat companies, restaurants, and retailers to help them capitalize on opportunities in this space. But just to recap, I was going through the 3 key pillars of work that GFI does. It's segmented into our science and technology team, our corporate engagement team, And then lastly, our policy team, which focuses on advocating for fair regulation of alternative proteins and lobbies for government investment in additional research. And what motivates our work is the fact that our current system for producing meat, dairy, and eggs is extremely unsustainable and simply inefficient. This system exacerbates climate change, environmental degradation, antibiotic resistance, as well as global food insecurity and issues of animal welfare. And despite more and more people learning about all of this, we're just not seeing enough individuals changing the way that they eat. Instead, we're actually seeing per capita meat consumption continues to rise globally. So GFI's theory of change is based on the idea that consumers will choose alternative proteins when they are as delicious, affordable, and accessible as conventional animal products. So instead of asking consumers to completely give up the foods that they know and love, we can instead make products that are just as tasty and affordable as conventional meat. So that's our theory of change. And here is the alternative protein landscape. So we have a few different ways that we think about alternative proteins at GFI. We can use plants, we can use fermentation or microbes, or we can cultivate it from animal cells. And if you want to learn about each of these pillars of alternative proteins a lot more in depth, I highly recommend going to gfi.org/science, where you can take a much deeper dive into the science of each of these three pillars. And I just want to note that in the future, and even now, we probably won't see these production platforms, so plant-based, fermentation, and cultivated, as completely distinct segments of the industry, but rather as one large industry where we produce alternative protein products across this spectrum. For example, we often think of the Impossible Burger fitting neatly into the plant-based category, but it actually uses fermentation to produce like hemoglobin, the signature ingredient that gives it that bloody appearance and meaty taste. You might also notice more and more dairy products that are mostly plant-based, but have fermentation-derived milk protein, for example. So that's what we mean when we say there's a hybrid or a spectrum of these products, and that they're not just kind of living distinctly within their own categories. With all of that said, when we're thinking about different careers and relevant backgrounds in the alternative protein space right now, it can be really useful to differentiate the three production platforms to get a better understanding of the specific skills and experiences that are needed to get into this space, at least for right now. And so if you're looking for roles in science and technology, you might focus on some of these areas on the screen. So you might lend your skills to process optimization or end product formulation, or play a more upstream role in identifying ingredients or supplying optimal inputs. And all of these segments of the value chain are powered by research and development. Sorry about that. But clearly, we need a lot of technical innovation. And when we zoom out and view the entire alternative protein ecosystem, we see even greater diversity of roles that are not just limited to science and engineering. We need investment to fund all this research. And once we have the end products, we need to be able to establish distribution channels that make these products truly accessible. And across all of these stages, we're depending on industry enablers such as the labor force, business services, and compliance. So each segment of this value chain employs many, many different roles requiring varying skill sets. So you'll want to keep this in mind when you're thinking about your ideal role in this growing industry. So now let's dig into the career fields and relevant backgrounds for alternative proteins. I'll start by saying that these jobs exist across many sectors. I'll start with academia. So if you're a scientist, Academia is probably the most established or familiar pathway for you. Research on alternative proteins is well underway at universities and institutions around the world. And getting or having a PhD would allow you to lead your own research group, for example, or teach the next generation of talent that's needed for the alternative protein industry. Moving over to industry, the industry is composed of business to consumer or B2C companies and business to business or B2B companies. You'll recognize many B2C companies like Beyond Meat, for example, but B2B companies might be less familiar to consumers since they work more behind the scenes. These can include companies that produce specific ingredients or design processing equipment for the entire industry. There's the option to create a startup or work at a startup, which we'll hear more about from Minami today. Then there are also companies that are relatively new, but maybe past the startup phase. On the other end of the spectrum, we have established companies that are starting to get into the alternative protein space. These include food companies, even conventional meat companies, and companies in biotech, biopharma, and other life sciences. Compared to academia, the industry offers roles for a greater variety of backgrounds and education, especially non-technical positions. And just like any business, alt protein companies need to fill roles related to finance, human resources, and marketing, for example. And then moving to the third sector, which is government, which can include research in government labs, for example. You can also direct public funding into alternative protein research as a program officer for a government research funding agency like the NSF, as another great example. And if you're interested in policy, you can encourage policymakers to advocate for public funding, or even become a policymaker yourself who champions alternative proteins. Then on the regulatory side, there's a lot of work to be done to approve cultivated meat for sale in many countries. Last but not least, there are nonprofits like the Good Food Institute, which offer many ways to support the ecosystem at large. For example, a lot of my work right now is to support university students and faculty members in academia who are trying to build novel alternative protein courses and degree programs, as well as grow awareness and understanding around alternative proteins on campus. So there's also a world of nonprofits focused on climate, animal welfare, and other causes that really overlap with the same motivations behind the protein transition. If you've already narrowed it down to careers in science and engineering, then these are some areas of technical expertise that are needed by the alternative protein industry. And I will say this is not an exhaustive list, but hopefully it gives you an idea of how these three production platforms differ and also how they overlap. GFI administered a survey to companies across the alt protein space, and out of about 130 companies, some of the most in-demand skill sets across all production platforms, plant-based, cultivated, and fermentation, were food science and biotechnology, just to give you a little perspective. But to build the alternative protein ecosystem, additional expertise is needed too. These are just some of the non-technical roles that exist in our field, and it will continue to grow. This list will definitely be changing over the years to come. But for instance, like I mentioned earlier, many companies, all businesses have positions related to business, marketing, sales, HR, and finance, regardless of the industry. And then many of these roles relate to things like consumer acceptance, accessibility, awareness building, science communication, and sustainable development, which are all very critical issues to solve for the future of food. In this last section, I'll highlight a few resources for building a career in this field. This is a really good starting place if you just want to understand the field and maybe stay up to date on what's been going on. The Student Resource Guide is kind of your one-stop shop for getting started in the alternative protein space. It's great for any newcomers who are thinking about what should I be majoring? What should I be pursuing in college or graduate school, things like that. So this is a really good place to just start. And we have a lot of great resources linked within the Student Resource Guide to take you to the right place based on what you're looking for. We also have our annual State of the Industry reports for the plant-based, cultivated, and fermentation pillars. And this is a great way to get an understanding of the commercial landscape, investments, regulatory developments, and scientific progress of the different production platforms every year. And as I mentioned earlier on, if you want to learn more about the science, we have gfi.org/science for a lot of our deeper dive pages. But if you want even more, we have a free open access online course that I highly recommend for anyone who wants more of like a lecture style course on understanding alternative proteins. And for more learning opportunities, I highly recommend looking at our alternative protein course database. So you can use this to find courses that are offered online and in person at institutions around the world. This could give you a good idea of where you might want to study if you're a student, or it's good to just simply be aware of the types of courses that do currently exist on alternative proteins. gfi.org/vocation is our hub for everything careers related. We maintain a career portal, which lists available positions across the ecosystem. We also have a fabulous interview series that profiles a variety of pioneering researchers. Those are really great interviews to read. And then for the entrepreneurial spirits here today, we have a startup manual, which lays out the key steps for starting an alternative protein company. And many of you may have found this webinar from gfi.org/events, but if you want to get even more in tune or stay up to date on other events that are hosted by GFI or other organizations on alternative proteins, this is a great place to look. Each month we have a Science of Alt Protein seminar, which is geared towards a technical audience and focuses on cutting-edge research developments. We also have Business of Alt Protein seminar series, which talks more about commercializing alternative protein products and the business side of things. And yeah, I just listed a few of the upcoming events that are happening in June and July. So I highly recommend keeping gfi.org/events on your radar so you can stay up to date and network with other folks who might be attending these events. I wanted to highlight our researcher directory, our alt protein researcher directory, and researchers who are in this directory indicate the kinds of collaborations they're open to, whether it be with students, labs, or companies. And many of these labs are hiring, and some folks in the directory list whether they're open to serving as mentors. And you're always welcome to just reach out via LinkedIn once you've found somebody in this directory. I also wanted to highlight our solutions database. This is full of research ideas and commercial white spaces that have been identified by GFI's team of subject matter experts. So if you go ahead and just browse through this database, it can really help to contextualize the field for you and maybe even narrow down the contributions that you might want to make in shaping the future of this industry. And I do want to highlight the importance of community. We have a couple of different ways that you can join an alt protein community. I always love to talk about the alt protein project since this is the program that I work very closely on at GFI. This is our university program that's dedicated to turning universities into engines for alternative protein education, research, and innovation. We are currently on our way to having 70 active chapters around the globe. So it's a very active and growing community of students from undergraduate to graduate students. If you're a student and you don't have an alt protein project at your university, I highly recommend looking into it. Feel free to check out our website, which is gfi.org/the alt protein project to learn a little bit more. In preparation for when applications open again in early 2025. And if you are not a student, or even if you are a student, but you just want to be plugged into another alt protein community, we have our GF Ideas community. So this is a great way to network with other entrepreneurs, scientists, subject matter experts. And yeah, it's a great way to really connect and find others who are like-minded and maybe doing similar things to what you're looking to do. Lastly, I wanted to share a few more resources from other organizations. 80,000 Hours is a London-based nonprofit that investigates which careers have the largest positive social impact. And provides career advice based on their findings. So if you filter by factory farming, this will include a lot of job postings in the alternative protein space. There's also Animal Advocacy Careers, which offers many detailed skills profiles for animal advocacy roles, including technical ones, as well as other types of roles. And then I want to highlight Alt Protein Careers, which offers a fantastic jobs board for those that are based in North America. They also offer a bunch of other resources and services, such as career coaching, if that's something you're looking for. And then lastly, Talist works to directly connect candidates with companies. They have a really cool matching process if you go ahead and register and sign up for an account. I highly recommend it. They also offer great monthly virtual events, as well as many free career support resources. And then, of course, I have to mention GFI. We have a career opportunities webinar, which is separate from this one. I know the name is kind of similar, but the career opportunities webinar is specifically for individuals who are actively looking to apply to an open role on the GFI US team. The next career opportunities webinar will be hosted this week on June 11th at 2 p.m. Eastern. So that's a great place to learn more and ask questions about what it's like to work at GFI, what's the application and hiring process like. All of those things can be asked at that webinar. And if you are an international applicant, we encourage you to just check out opportunities with our affiliate organizations. They have their own websites and jobs boards as well. That's it for the presentation portion of this webinar. Thank you for listening. I know that was a high-level overview, so if you have any other questions, feel free to reach out to me. My email is asias@gfi.org, and I'm happy to dig into maybe some of your specific questions a little bit more deeply. And now for the fun part, we are going to dive into a fireside chat with Minami. And first, I would like to introduce Minami. So Minami is an enthusiastic food scientist dedicated to fostering innovation and shaping sustainable, healthy, and environmentally beneficial future food systems. With a foundation in wine microbiology, her earlier focus on studying immobilization supports paved the way to transition into the realm of cellular agriculture. This unique journey propelled her towards pioneering and filing intellectual property for the development of edible mycelium microcarriers, aimed at facilitating the proliferation of animal cells crucial in cultivated meat production. She now researches the edible microcarriers for her Ph.D. thesis, guided by Dr. David Block, and as part of the Cultivated Meat Consortium to revolutionize food technology for a more sustainable and healthier future. Additionally, Minami plays a pivotal role as the co-founder and director of Cultivated Foods at a university spinoff company called Optimized Foods, which harnesses the power of mycelium to create high-margin, delicious food alternatives. Her journey representing women in STEM and entrepreneurship perfectly aligns with being a fellow at Supply Chain Capital and resonates deeply in her quest to revolutionize food systems through innovative solutions that prioritize both human health and the environment. So with that said, I'm going to jump into some questions to get us started. And in the meantime, I think I've seen some people drop questions in the Q&A, but feel free to continue doing that. And we will save some time at the end of the call for questions about Minami's background. So for the first question here, I'd just love to learn a little bit more about how you became involved in the alternative protein field and the studies that you've completed along your journey so far. So if you could walk us through your educational background, starting with your undergraduate studies in viticulture and enology, and then your master's in biotechnology, and also sharing how you decided to pursue degrees in these specific disciplines.
Yeah, for sure. Well, thanks for inviting me to talk on this, Asia. And yeah, I think I'm really excited to share, my unique journey because it's definitely, I wouldn't say very typical. Um, so hopefully gives another perspective on those who are thinking of transitioning into alternative protein. Um, yeah, so I first didn't start off at really anything that was related to alternative protein. As you kind of mentioned, my bachelor's is in viticulture enology, which for those of you who don't know what that is, it's the discipline and science behind wine making and also the grapes to make the wine. And I initially got, really interested in this space because at UC Davis, which is where I got my degree, we have an excellent winemaking program. Um, there is a student winery as well as multiple vineyards. And it's very immersive and as well as very close to um, the biggest producers of wine in the country, which is Napa and Sonoma area. So there's a lot of opportunities to learn directly with industry members in that space. And that was kind of like my initial attraction towards everything. Like I wanted to really know about the science of wine. And then after talking with professors in the department in viticulture enology, I felt extremely supported. And I had a great mentor, Professor Linda Bisson, who's now emeritus. But she was doing microbiology research in wine. And that initially was my first starting point within science and research in general. And I was researching about yeasts, which are the microorganisms that convert the sugars in the grapes to alcohol. And I wanted to learn more into that biochemistry, microbiology space within winemaking. So after undergrad, I continued research and I pursued a master's in not viticulture enology, but biotechnology. It's it's a pretty niche field, so it's hard to find a degree just for viticulture enology. I think UC Davis has one of like the most unique specialties for that. But I wanted to sort of explore outside of Davis, and I wanted to travel and I wanted to learn about different winemaking styles, even outside of the US. So my master's I got in Spain at the University of Cordoba, and they have a specialty wine making called Vino Fino, which is sherry wine in the US. And sherry wine yeasts are particularly sticky. They have a special sort of protein that allows them to stick onto each other as well as surfaces, creating a biofilm on top of the wine. And I was studying this as a way to make wine, but also develop solutions for winemaking as well. So we use this sticky quality of yeast to attach onto a edible support, and this helped clarify the wine faster, and that led to a lot of cost savings down the road for winemakers as well. Um, and this eventually transitioned into when I came to do my PhD back at UC Davis. I wanted to just keep learning and developing out this technology, and I learned about cultivated meat. And I think the timing was right too at that time because this was when UC Davis got the NSF grant for cultivated meat. It was the first national government grant awarded for cultivated meat. And I learned that a lot of cells that are used for cultivated meat production are adherent dependent. They need a support to stick onto. And I had been studying edible supports for winemaking, but I knew that this could be something that could be tried for cultivated meat. So I proposed this to my professor, and he encouraged me to try and research about it. And that ultimately now has become my thesis, as well as it spinning off into a technology we use for optimized foods. Um, but yeah, that in a kind of nutshell has led to me, um, yeah, pursuing a PhD and evolving to apply an existing technology into a completely sort of new field within food and alternative protein, right? So I think a lot of the technologies we use to make alternative proteins or cultivated meat are sort of borrowed or adapted existing technologies. And yeah, and so even if you kind of start out with a field that you didn't think is anything related to alternative protein, I think there could be a lot of parallels or similarities you can make to adapt what you already know to the space.
Thank you so much for just demonstrating that adaptability. And I feel like that, like you said, is so relevant to so many different, even experts in the field who are experts in the alternative protein field, but maybe came from maybe the medical field or regenerative medicine or tissue engineering, where the applications maybe weren't obvious at face value. But then when you learn a little bit more about cultivated meat, for example, you see those applications, the same skill sets, but just applied in a different context. So that's really cool that you were able to make that connection even from something so specific such as wine, and making that connection is really awesome. Wonderful. And so I know you spoke a little bit about your PhD, and many people wonder whether they should pursue a PhD in order to work in the alternative protein field and industry. And I'm curious if you could share what your favorite and least favorite part of pursuing a PhD in alternative proteins has been, and what advice would you give to someone who's considering and weighing whether they should do a PhD in alternative proteins or not?
Yeah, yeah, great question. I think yeah, deciding to do a PhD for me was definitely a big decision. I mean, it's going to be a couple of years in your life that you're honing into this one specific degree, but ultimately it's really about, you know, building expertise of what you know, right? And you get to like very much concentrate on something that you're particularly interested in. So looking back, I think that has been the best thing about my choice of pursuing a PhD. Another thing that I really think worked out for me was that, you know, I was in a field that was completely different from alternative protein, wine. And I think it would have been a little difficult for me to transition into alternative protein if I didn't choose to do the PhD. It would have been, I think, more difficult to gain that experience. And as a student, you have a lot more opportunities, right, to sort of explore a field that you might not otherwise have experience in before. So I definitely sort of like leveraged that uh, sort of ignorance into a curiosity, and then drove that through to transitioning from wine to alternative protein ultimately. Um, yeah, my favorite part, as you said, as you asked, I think about the PhD part was um, transitioning, but also I learned a lot of tangential things about research that I didn't expect when I first pursued a PhD. So my thesis, ultimately, we filed intellectual property for it, and it's now a pending patent. And I got to see all of that process, from what it's like to conceive an idea and then file that as an intellectual property, and all of these things that ultimately led it to be protected in the end, and then licensed to a startup, which is yeah, I think would have been really difficult again if I wasn't in academia. There's a lot of resources that the university can provide you, from helping you file a patent to, you know, even if it's like within networking, connecting you to people who are within other institutions, other universities, nonprofits like GFI. Um, so that like expansion of network is, I think, very valuable. Um, I would say my least favorite part, I think the hardest part is, you know, research and like for a PhD can sometimes be very long hours in the lab. And you know, research oftentimes doesn't go as how you planned, and you spend a lot of time figuring out how to do something, but also like what went wrong. And so you know, and there's actually really no clear answers most of the time, so it's a lot of navigating those uncertainties by yourself. um, I think that is you know, the part that is extremely challenging. Not that I like don't like that, because ultimately it learns to improvement and growth, but that's something that you have to be ready for sure. um and yeah, I would say, as I said, like try to leverage all of your resources that you have as a student. You get so many, like, you know, discounts also as a student, that you can leverage. For example, um like I use a lot of like Canva for presentations, which there's some nonprofit or student like sort of discounts that you can get. Alt Protein Project is, you mentioned your presentation, I think is huge. That has definitely led me to connect with people in the industry, as well as just like gain an ecosystem, a student hub community of like-minded individuals that you can yeah, be excited about alternative protein and nerd out about it. So yeah, all of those things, I would say, just enjoy them while you're a student.
Awesome. Thanks for that. I do want to maybe speed through some of the other questions so that we can make sure we have time for some audience questions. But I would love you to just speak a little bit to co-founding a university spinoff, Optimize Food, And I'm curious what led you to found your own company, and did you always know you wanted to go down the entrepreneurial path? Like, is that something you always kind of had in the back of your head, or is it something that based on your research and your PhD, you're like, oh, this makes sense, like I should do this?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. You know, I didn't really like have plans to start a company when I started my PhD. But I think I always had sort of like the affinity of an entrepreneurial mindset. Um, you know, I really wanted to study a science discipline that was applied. And I like science, but when it comes to just basic science, it doesn't get me excited unless I know what the application for it is. And if that application is impactful, like for alternative proteins, I think that's where I'm like most excited. And at the same time, I love the like ideation stage. I like the like creating things from scratch. And so all of these sort of like qualities combined, I think made it very fruitful to to spin off and start a company. Um, with Optimized Foods, there were other my other co-founders um, had the similar interest as me in terms of using mycelium as this edible scaffold for one of our applications is cultivated meat or the cultured caviar. But we all were very passionate about this, and that was what brought us together to ultimately start Optimized Foods. So yeah, I think it's a combination. And I'm really happy to be able to see both the academic and industry side um, grow and grow within the alternative protein space. Um, I think that unique perspective has been the most like key or important part of my career moving forward.
That makes a lot of sense. And I know you were kind of getting into it, but just because you have that unique perspective of being in research and academia and then also being an entrepreneur, I'm curious if you could just highlight maybe some of the key differences you see between working in a startup versus working in academia.
Hmm. Yeah, I think the biggest difference that I feel a lot too is the speed at which how things move. Um, the startup entrepreneurial side of things moves extremely fast. Um, you know, there is also like a competition aspect, I guess, too, to try to get to improve sort of faster or than others could be an advantage for you as a company, right? So I think that the way that things are moving fast is very different than how academia moves sometimes, where it's much more deliberate and much more, in some ways, slow because you're just a lot more careful planning your steps. And it might not be something within your control as well because there's a timeline for, you know, research publications, which I don't know if people in this audience know, but it can take a long time until your manuscript is published. Data collection is also extremely slow sometimes too. So yeah, I think that has been the hardest part about matching the two timelines together when working both in industry and academia has been uh, the hardest. Um, Another thing I guess I would just want to highlight is the way that like information is disseminated in academia is much more open. You know, there's this concept of making science open access and leveraging other research's uh, past results to improve, you know, gain more insight into another concept. Whereas I think in industry, you have to be sort of careful about who and what information you're sharing, particularly because a lot of key points that make your company unique could be like a trade secret sometimes, right? Which you can't really say all the details to everybody. That's not how that protection of your technology works. So the way that you have to approach, this what you know from academia to industry is really different. Yeah. So those are like the key differences that I have seen.
Wonderful. And I think we have time for maybe one more question before we jump over to the Q&A. So feel free, folks in the audience, to add any questions that you have for Minami while we have her. You can add them to the Q&A and we'll go through and answer those right after this last question, which I think will be helpful. And we didn't really touch on this yet, but earlier this year, you joined Supply Chain Capital as a fellow. Supply Chain Capital invests at the intersection of food, culture, and technology in order to catalyze early-stage sustainable businesses that modernize the food system. And I'm curious if you could tell us, how did you get this position? What led you to Supply Chain Capital? And what kind of projects do you work on as a fellow at the firm?
Yeah. So, Supply Chain Capital, as you said, we are a VC that invests in ag tech, food tech. The two general partners who are the founders of the firm, Shanna Harris and Norma Cadena, two wonderful women who have stood on this intersection of, trying to make innovative, impactful technologies commercializable, right? And really honing in on the supply chain of food systems and improving that so that food is more accessible, food is more nutritious, food is much more better in the future for our future population. And so the way that I got into supply chain capital was through a center at UC Davis called the Innovation Institute of Food and Health, IIFH, and they have a fellowship program that allows graduate students to go to a venture capital firm and work there. And it's sort of like a internship. And what the science fellows like myself do is we look through the diligence of the potential sort of startups that the firm is thinking of possibly investing in. And I get to put like I get to look at that technology and tell the firm what could be the potential benefits of this, what might be exciting about it, or maybe it's not really that exciting, and maybe we just we watched that deal progress and see if there's other exciting opportunities. Um, so that's how I get to apply my science into this extremely new position that I get to experience. And I was initially really interested in this because as an entrepreneur in the startup for Optimized Foods, we do talk to a lot of VCs during the fundraising process, and I wanted to kind of experience that whole spectrum of approaching it as a startup, but then how does that deal, or how does that startup then eventually get evaluated until it's funded, and then what happens after funding? So a lot of venture capital firms will help. You essentially become part of the company once you invest. So they have an active voice in helping sort of shape your progression as a startup. Um, and I wanted to just experience the whole process and be a part of all of that. So this fellowship has been awesome in being able to see how the investment side into alternative proteins and the future food systems work. And yeah, I Davis has a unique program like this too for this, but other programs, other universities I've found um, have also a similar kind of program. And again, I think as a student, you got to leverage all the resources that you got. So that's something that I'm currently doing. Yeah.
Definitely, yeah. And that actually kind of transitions into one of the first questions I saw from the Q&A chat. And I'm just kind of broadening this question a little bit. If there's anything else that you have to share on this, Minami, in terms of leveraging existing university resources, or just because you have so much experience with finding, opportunities like fellowships or internships, things like that. Do you have any other insights that would be worth sharing in terms of how do you even find those internships or fellowships or career opportunities in the space?
Yeah. For any interested student or even just like individual that wants to get into alternative protein, especially, I always point them to GFI. I think like the even just like looking through the website is like so much information, and like I constantly use the industry reports too, as just like even within research, but also for learning about the market and consumer insight studies that you guys do. I think compiling all that information is so useful. So I would point anyone who comes to me to look at GFI. Um, there's a lot of other organizations that support students. It doesn't have to be like, I don't think it has to be within alternative proteins. For example, like my major is food science. It's extremely broad, but it led me to alternative protein. I know some other people's majors are like biomedical engineering or like muscle physiology or chemical engineering, and they are, there's applications for that in alternative protein. So I would first, still go through maybe your own department or what's sort of around you, and start with that, and just like ask people who have been in the space, where would be the best places to look for these opportunities. I certainly got a lot of information from the All Protein Project through my professors. They have been able to connect me with people who are knowledgeable in the space. Um, and with the IIFH one, that was something that came through to my university. Actually, my professor told me about that opportunity, that fellowship. So yeah, if you surround yourself with like-minded individuals, I think could be like a really good source of uh, finding some of these fellowships or internships, scholarships.
That's a really good point, and another reason to start building that community or even just join an existing alt protein community. And it doesn't even have to be alt protein specific. I think there's a lot of other organizations that have overlapping mission alignment. Effective altruism is a great example of this, where you can find other like-minded individuals who are trying to build a career based on impact. And alternative proteins often falls into that category of a high impact vocational path. So I love that you pointed that it was actually your professor who recommended that you apply to this, because having those people in your community just gives you more ears and eyes out in the field to then figure out, oh, okay, this wasn't on my radar. Now it is, because somebody told me about it. So that is really great insight. And I know we only have a few minutes left, but we have quite a few questions here. And I'm happy to take some of these questions and respond to them afterwards. But because we have Minami here, I would love to highlight a few questions that are maybe just one question at this point that is specific, I think, to your background and what you could speak to. But yeah, I'm curious if you could speak to, what do you think is the specific area of cultivated meat or the industry that needs to be improved most currently. As somebody who's, on the research side of things and also founding your own company, curious to get your perspective on what you see as the highest need for improvement to make this field successful.
Yeah, that is such an awesome question. I think when I first started in all protein in cultivated meat, it was much more about a B2C play, basically kind of making sort of like that end product happen, and having a cultivated like hamburger beef patty or like a alt dairy egg product or something. But I think now it's clear that we need a lot more tools and enabling technologies to help scale that first sort of prototype that had got excitement and be able to make it in much larger scales, like 10 to 1,000 liter sort of like cultivators or fermenters. And that means, having the bioreactors and having the right tools to improve the seed chains and be able to make sufficient media necessary and sort of navigating the feedstocks necessary or available to make that happen, right? It really, if you look at the whole like supply chain of things, every part of that needs to be scaled consistently, like a lot, and be also cost efficient. So I do see a lot more need and a lot more focus now into these enabling technologies. Um, it doesn't even have to be like tangential. There could be also like, software that enables you to know if your bioprocess is sustainable. Is it using too much water? Is it using too much energy? How can we cut back on that, but still be able to efficiently produce what we need to? So yeah, I'm particularly like excited about these enabling technologies, these supporting sort of tools that all protein companies will need to make this, adaptable and a consumable product like globally. Um, and I also recognize that we're very close to time. So if there are questions that others want to ask me, I'm definitely going to be available via, I think my email is available like on the website. So yeah, please feel free to reach out to me.
Definitely, yeah. And I can share the recording for this webinar and then also the slide deck and our emails in the follow-up email. So I know we have a lot of questions we weren't able to get to live, but thank you everyone for joining today. This was a super insightful conversation, and it's always helpful to just hear personal perspectives on how they went about creating a career in the alternative protein space, since it's not a cookie cutter process by any means. It's not linear in many ways. And so thank you so much for sharing your story and advice with all of us today, Minami. And thank you all in the audience for joining us today and asking great questions. We will be in touch soon. Take care, everyone. Bye.